The planet called New Eden hung in space like a beautiful blue and green jewel. It was the prettiest world humanity had ever found outside of Earth itself. Rolling hills covered with golden wheat stretched across its continents. Rivers of crystal-clear water flowed through valleys filled with flowers that smelled like honey. Nearly 4 million people called New Eden home, and they had built a peaceful life there, growing food that fed a dozen other human colonies. Commander Lisa Monroe stood on the bridge of her ship, the Defiance, watching New Eden grow larger on the view screen. She was a tall woman with short brown hair and calm gray eyes. She had served in the United Earth Navy for 20 years, and she had never fired a weapon in anger. The galaxy had been peaceful for humanity, and Lisa had spent most of her career on patrol missions and rescue operations. The Defiance was a good ship. It was a patrol vessel, designed to watch over human territory and help civilian ships in trouble. It carried 300 crew members who were more like a family than a military unit. They played cards together, celebrated birthdays together, and looked forward to returning home after each long mission. Lieutenant Kevin Park sat at the sensor station, a young man fresh out of the academy who still got excited about seeing new star systems. He was running a routine scan of the space around New Eden when his screen suddenly lit up with warning signals. "Captain," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I have unidentified vessels dropping out of hyperspace. 12 contacts." He paused, and his face went pale. "No, 18. Ma'am, they're still coming." Lisa felt her heart begin to beat faster as she watched the numbers climb on her own display. 27 ships, 43, 61. 61 warships, each one at least 10 times larger than the Defiance, had just appeared at the edge of New Eden's system. "Red alert," Lisa said, keeping her voice steady, even though her hands wanted to shake. "All hands to battle stations. Lieutenant Park, can you identify those ships?" Kevin's fingers flew across his console. "Yes, ma'am. They match the profile of Draelith warships, the Draelith Empire, from the Outer Rim territories." Lisa had heard of the Draelith. Everyone in the Navy had. They were a conquering species that took what they wanted and destroyed anyone who tried to stop them. But they had never shown any interest in human space before. Why were they here now? "Open a communication channel," Lisa ordered. The view screen flickered, and suddenly Lisa was looking at a face that would haunt her nightmares for the rest of her short life. Red scales covered the alien's head like armor. His eyes burned with a cruel intelligence, and his mouth was twisted into a smile that showed rows of sharp teeth. "I am Fleet Commander Vorath of the Draelith Empire," the alien said. His voice was like knives scraping together. "You will surrender this system immediately, or we will take it by force." Lisa stood up straighter. She was afraid, but she was also a commander of the United Earth Navy, and she would not show weakness to this creature. "This is Commander Lisa Monroe of the Starship Defiance. New Eden is a protected colony under the Sol Confederation. Any hostile action against this world or its people will be considered an act of war against all of humanity." Vorath laughed. It was an ugly sound, like breaking glass. "War? Against humanity? Your single patrol vessel threatens war against the Draelith Armada?" He leaned closer to his screen, and his burning eyes seemed to look right through Lisa. "We have studied your species, human. You are weak. You live barely a century before you die. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no venom. You are prey animals who somehow stumbled into the stars. Today, you will learn your place." The screen went black as Vorath ended the transmission. For a moment, nobody on the bridge spoke. Then Lisa turned to her crew, the people she had served with for years, the people who trusted her to lead them. "All hands, prepare for combat," she said. "Communications, get me a channel to Earth Command. Send them everything, every scan, every recording, every piece of data we have on this fleet. The people back home need to know what happened here." A young officer named Stephanie Walsh sat at the weapons station. She had freckles across her nose, and she was only 24 years old. Her hands were shaking as she activated the Defiance's weapon systems. "Captain," Stephanie said quietly, "we can't win this fight. There are 61 of them and one of us." "I know," Lisa replied. "We're not trying to win. We're trying to buy time." She turned to look at New Eden on the view screen. "Start the evacuation protocols. Get as many people off that planet as possible. Every minute we stay alive is another minute for civilian transports to escape." "And what about us?" Kevin asked. Lisa smiled sadly. "We do our duty, Lieutenant. We protect our people for as long as we can." The first Dralith plasma bolt struck the Defiance's shields like a hammer, and the whole ship shook violently. Warning lights flashed across the bridge. Somewhere below decks, an explosion sent a tremor through the floor. "Shields down to 70%, Kevin reported. "They're concentrating fire on us. I think they want to destroy us quickly so we can't interfere with the invasion." "Then let's not make it easy for them," Lisa said. "Stephanie, return fire all batteries. Aim for their lead ships." The Defiance's weapons were not designed for this kind of fight. They were meant to disable pirate vessels and stop smugglers, not to battle warships. But Stephanie did her best, sending streams of energy bolts toward the Dralith fleet. One of the shots found its mark. A Dralith destroyer, hit in its engine section, began to spin out of control. Secondary explosions tore through its hull, and then the whole ship came apart in a ball of fire. "Direct hit!" someone shouted. "We got one." But there were still 60 ships left, and all of them were now focused on the tiny Defiance. The next hour was pure chaos. The Defiance twisted and turned through space, dodging some shots and taking others. Lisa used every trick she knew, hiding behind asteroids, using the planet's gravity to change direction suddenly, and firing at any target that came within range. Her crew fought like heroes. Engineers kept the engines running when they should have failed. Medics dragged wounded sailors to safety. Gunners fired until their weapons overheated, then waited impatiently for them to cool down so they could fire again. And on New Eden below, the evacuation had begun. Hundreds of transport ships lifted off from cities and farms, carrying civilians to safety. Each ship that escaped was another victory, another group of people who would survive this day. After 4 hours of fighting, the Defiance had destroyed 7 Dralith warships. 7 ships against a patrol vessel that was never meant for combat. The Dralith commanders could not believe it. This was impossible. This should not be happening. But Lisa Monroe knew something that Vorath did not understand. Humans did not fight for glory or power. They fought for each other. Every person on her crew knew they were going to die, and they had accepted it because their deaths meant that others would live. The Defiance finally died 18 hours after the battle began. Her weapons were destroyed. Her hull was torn open in 100 places, but she had never stopped fighting. Lisa Monroe stood on her ruined bridge, bleeding from a wound on her head, surrounded by the bodies of her friends. The emergency lights flickered red. The air was filled with smoke. On the view screen, she could see one last transport ship making its jump to safety. 2 million people had been evacuated from New Eden. 2 million lives saved because the Defiance had refused to run. "Captain," Kevin said weakly from his station. He was badly hurt, but still at his post. "Dralith boarding parties are entering the ship." Lisa nodded. She picked up a weapon from the floor, a simple sidearm that would do nothing against the armored aliens about to storm her bridge. But she would not surrender. She would not kneel. "It has been an honor serving with all of you," she said to her surviving crew. The doors blew open, and red-scaled soldiers poured through. Commander Lisa Monroe fired her last shot, and then she was gone. But her message had already reached Earth, and across human space, People were watching the recordings from the Defiance. They saw their fellow humans fight against impossible odds. They saw the courage, the sacrifice, the refusal to give up, even when all hope was lost. And in the hearts of 20 billion humans, something ancient and terrible began to wake up. Something that had been sleeping since the last time their species faced extinction. The Draelith had started a war they did not understand. Humanity was about to teach them why that was a mistake. The battle for New Eden was over, but the war for the planet had just begun. When the Draelith transport ships landed on the surface, Fleet Commander Vorath expected to find a population ready to surrender. He expected frightened civilians begging for mercy. He expected an easy conquest, like all the other worlds his empire had taken. He was wrong. The first Draelith soldiers to step onto New Eden soil were met with gunfire. Not from military forces, because there was no military base on New Eden. The shots came from farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, and factory workers. People who had never held a weapon in anger picked up hunting rifles, kitchen knives, and metal pipes. They fought because they had no other choice. In the small town of Riverside, a retired Marine named Derek Collins heard the explosions from the landing site. He was 63 years old, with gray hair and bad knees. He had not worn a uniform in 20 years. But when he saw the Draelith ships descending from the sky, something inside him changed. Derek went to his basement and opened the locked chest that he had not touched since his retirement. Inside was his old combat gear, worn and faded, but still functional. He put it on, feeling the familiar weight of the armor on his shoulders. Then he walked outside and started knocking on doors. Within an hour, he had gathered 300 volunteers. Most of them had no military training at all. They were ordinary people, scared and confused, but willing to fight for their homes and families. "There's a mountain pass north of here," Derek told them. "It's the only way for the Draelith ground forces to reach the civilian evacuation zone. If we can hold that pass, we can buy time for more people to escape." A young woman named Sarah Hill stepped forward. She was a high school science teacher who had never fired a gun in her life. "How long do we need to hold it?" she asked. Derek looked at her with honest eyes. "As long as we can." They reached the mountain pass just before the Draelith advance force arrived. 300 humans against 5,000 armored alien soldiers. The odds were impossible. Everyone knew it. But they dug in anyway, building barriers from rocks and fallen trees, setting up firing positions behind boulders. When the first Draelith soldiers appeared at the base of the pass, Derek Collins stood up where they could see him. "This is as far as you go," he shouted. "Turn back now, or we will make you pay for every inch of ground." The Draelith commander laughed and ordered his troops forward. The battle for the mountain pass lasted 2 days. Derek Collins and his volunteers held their ground through the first assault, the second, the third. They ran out of ammunition and threw rocks. They ran out of rocks and used their bare hands. When one fighter fell, another took their place. Sarah Hill, the science teacher, figured out that the Draelith armor had a weak spot under the arms. She passed this information to the other fighters, and suddenly the aliens were dying in greater numbers. A farmer named George Bradley drove his tractor into a group of enemy soldiers, crushing 6 of them before they could react. A teenage boy named Marcus Bell climbed onto a Draelith tank and shoved a grenade into its exhaust port, destroying the vehicle, but losing his own life in the process. By the end of the second day, only 47 of the original 300 defenders remained. Derek Collins had been shot twice, but refused to leave his position. Sarah Hill had a broken arm, but kept firing with her other hand. They were exhausted, wounded, and running out of hope. But behind them, evacuation ships continued to launch. Every hour they held meant thousands more civilians reaching safety. On the morning of the third day, Draelith reinforcements finally overwhelmed the pass. Derek Collins died with his rifle in his hands, still firing. Sarah Hill was captured while trying to drag a wounded friend to safety. When Vorath reviewed the battle reports, he felt something he had never experienced before. It took him a while to recognize it as unease. "How many soldiers did we lose taking that pass?" he asked his second-in-command, a younger Draelith named Keseth. 47,000, my lord," Keseth replied, "against 300 untrained civilians." Vorath said nothing for a long moment. The numbers did not make sense. They should have swept through that pass in minutes. Instead, they had fought for 2 days and lost soldiers at a ratio that would be laughable if it were not so disturbing. "What about the rest of the planet?" Vorath finally asked. "Resistance everywhere, my lord. Every city, every town, every village. The humans are fighting in the streets, in the buildings, in the sewers. We have taken the capital, but we lost 11,000 more soldiers doing it." "And the evacuation?" Keseth hesitated. "Approximately 2 million humans escaped before we could establish full orbital control." Vorath slammed his fist against the wall, leaving a dent in the metal. 2 million? That is half their population. "Yes, my lord. The remaining 2 million have either been killed in the fighting or captured." Vorath forced himself to calm down. He had taken the planet. That was what mattered. The cost was higher than expected, but the Draelith Empire had vast resources. They could replace their losses. Humanity could not. "What do we do with the prisoners?" Keseth asked. Vorath considered the question. The captured humans would make excellent slaves. They were strong for their size, clever with their hands, and apparently too stubborn to give up easily. The labor camps always needed more workers. "Send them to the mining colonies," Vorath ordered. "They wanted to fight so badly, let them spend the rest of their lives digging rocks." Among the prisoners being loaded onto transport ships was a young communications officer named Amy Torres. She was 26 years old, with dark hair and eyes that had once been full of laughter. Now those eyes were empty, hollow with grief and shock. Her brother Daniel had died defending the mountain pass. Her parents had been captured when the capital fell. She did not know if they were alive or dead. Everything she had ever loved had been taken from her in the span of 3 days. But Amy Torres had done something before her capture. Something that would change the course of history. During the chaos of the evacuation, she had managed to get aboard one of the last transport ships. She had used her communication skills to send a message to Earth Command. A message containing the complete sensor logs from the Defiance. Recordings of Vorath's threats, images of the dead, names of the fallen, and footage of the massacres happening on New Eden's surface. The transport ship had jumped to safety just before the Draelith captured her. The message was already on its way to Earth. Amy did not know any of this when the Draelith soldiers threw her into a prison cell. She thought she had failed. She thought her family's sacrifice had been for nothing. But across the stars, her message was spreading. From Earth to Mars, from Mars to the outer colonies, from station to station and ship to ship. 20 billion humans watched the recordings and saw what had happened to New Eden. They saw Commander Lisa Monroe fighting to her last breath. They saw Derek Collins and his volunteers holding the mountain pass. They saw children being torn from their parents, homes being burned, lives being destroyed. And something changed in humanity that day. For 300 years, humans had been peaceful explorers. They had reached out to the stars with open hands, hoping to find friends and wonders. They had believed that the galaxy was a place where different species could live together in harmony. Now they knew the truth. The galaxy was not kind. The galaxy was not fair. The galaxy was a place where the strong took from the weak, and the only way to survive was to become stronger. On Earth, the President addressed a united humanity for the first time in history. Every nation, every faction, Every group that had ever disagreed about anything came together in that moment. "The Drelith Empire has attacked our people," the president said. "They have killed our brothers and sisters. They have enslaved our families. They believe we are weak because we chose peace over war." He paused, and his voice hardened into something cold and terrible. "They were wrong. We chose peace because we knew what we would become if we chose war. We held back our anger, our rage, our capacity for destruction, because we did not want to unleash it on the universe. The Drelith have given us no choice. Today, the Sol Confederation declares total war on the Drelith Empire. We will not stop until every prisoner is free. We will not stop until every crime is answered. We will not stop until the Drelith understand what humanity truly is. We are the children of a hostile world that tried to kill us for 1,000,000 years. We conquered our planet. We reached the stars. And now we will show the galaxy why you should never ever make humanity angry." Across human space, factories began retooling for war. Scientists abandoned their research to develop weapons. Volunteers lined up by the millions to join the military. The Drelith had woken a sleeping giant, and that giant was very, very angry. 6 months after the fall of New Eden, the galaxy looked at humanity and could not believe what it saw. Before the war, the Sol Confederation had possessed approximately 800 combat vessels. Military experts across the galaxy had studied this number carefully. They knew how long it took to build a warship, how much material was needed, how many trained crew members were required. By every calculation, humanity was a minor power that could never threaten a major empire like the Drelith. 6 months later, humanity had 8,000 combat ships. The Galactic Council sent observers to human space, trying to understand how this was possible. What they found shocked them. Factories that had once produced cars now built fighter craft. Shipyards that had constructed passenger liners now assembled destroyers. Universities had abandoned all research except military applications. Every scientist, every engineer, every skilled worker in human space was focused on one single goal: building the tools of war. But it was not just the ships that frightened the observers. It was the people. Humans who had never considered military service were volunteering by the millions. Grandparents who remembered Earth's ancient wars were teaching their grandchildren how to fight. Children learned to operate emergency systems in case their stations were attacked. The entire species had transformed itself from peaceful explorers into warriors in less than half a year. Admiral Nathan Cole stood on the bridge of his flagship, the carrier Victory, watching the assembled fleet through the viewport. He was 58 years old, with gray hair and deep lines on his face. He had spent most of his career behind a desk, managing logistics and supply chains. He had never expected to lead humanity into its first interstellar war. Beside him stood Captain Amy Torres. She had been rescued from a Drelith prisoner transport 3 months ago, during a daring raid that had freed over 10,000 human captives. The experience had changed her. The laughing young woman who had once loved music and dancing was gone. In her place was a warrior with cold eyes and a heart full of ice. "We have received a message from the Galactic Council," Nathan said, reading from a datapad. "The Cathari are offering to mediate. They want us to accept a negotiated settlement with the Drelith." "What are the terms?" Amy asked. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "The Drelith will return half of the surviving prisoners. They will withdraw from New Eden. They will pay reparations for the damage they caused." "Half the prisoners," Amy repeated. "And the other half?" Nathan hesitated. "The Drelith claim they have a right to keep them. They call it compensation for their losses." Nathan watched her face, looking for some sign of the grief he knew she must be feeling. Her parents were among the prisoners still held by the Drelith. Her brother was dead. Everything she had ever loved had been taken from her. The Council thinks we should accept, Nathan continued. They say the Drelith fleet still outnumbers ours 3-1. They say we should be practical. They say this is the best deal we can hope for. And what do you think, Admiral? Nathan Cole looked out at his fleet. 8,000 ships, crewed by men and women who had left their homes, their families, their dreams, to fight for their species. His own daughter served on a frigate somewhere in that formation. She was 25 years old, and she had told him she would rather die than let the Drelith win. I think practical is a word used by people who have never watched their children die. I think the Council has forgotten what it feels like to be hunted, to be preyed upon, to be treated like animals. I think they have been at peace so long that they have forgotten why war exists. He turned to face Amy directly. Captain Torres, I am going to address the fleet. I want you to hear what I say, and then I want you to tell me if I am wrong. Nathan activated the fleet-wide communication system. His voice would reach every ship, every station, every human who had volunteered to fight. This is Admiral Cole, he began. The Galactic Council has offered us peace. The Drelith have offered us terms. They believe we should accept because we are outnumbered, because we are small, because we are young, because we have been among the stars for only 3 centuries, while they have ruled their corner of the galaxy for 50,000 years. He paused, letting his words sink in. They have forgotten that humanity was born on a world that tried to kill us every single day. They have forgotten the ice ages that buried our ancestors under miles of snow. They have forgotten the plagues that killed millions. They have forgotten the wars we fought among ourselves, wars that were more terrible than anything the galaxy has ever seen. We survived all of that, not because we were strong, not because we were smart, but because we refused to give up, because when the universe knocked us down, we got back up, every single time. The Drelith took our people. They murdered our children. They burned our world. And now they expect us to negotiate. They expect us to accept half our families back and say thank you. His voice hardened into steel. Today, we give them our answer. Today we show them what humanity does to those who harm our own. Today, we bring our people home. All of them. All ships jump to attack coordinates. We are going to war. The fleet moved as one, 8,000 vessels vanishing into hyperspace in a wave of light. When they emerged, they were at the edge of Drelith territory. The enemy was waiting for them. 24,000 Drelith warships, the largest fleet the Empire had ever assembled, formed a wall of metal and firepower between the humans and their destination. On the Drelith flagship, Fleet Commander Vorath watched the human fleet appear on his sensors. He smiled his sharp-toothed smile. This was what he had been waiting for. The humans had been foolish enough to attack, and now he would destroy them. All ships, open fire, he commanded. The battle that followed would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for thousands of years. It was not supposed to be possible. The Drelith had superior numbers, superior technology, and superior training. By every measure, they should have won easily. Instead, they found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. Human ships fought in ways that made no sense to the Drelith commanders. When their weapons failed, they rammed enemy vessels. When their engines died, they used maneuvering thrusters to position themselves for one last shot. When their ships were crippled beyond repair, the crews triggered self-destruct systems that took enemy ships with them. The Drelith could not understand it. In their culture, a defeated warrior surrendered and accepted whatever fate the victor chose. That was the sensible thing to do. That was the logical thing to do. Humans did not surrender. Humans did not accept defeat. Humans kept fighting until there was nothing left to fight with, and then they fought some more. Admiral Cole directed the battle from the bridge of the Victory, his voice calm and steady, even as explosions lit up the space around him. He gave orders with precision, moving his ships like pieces on a game board, always thinking 3 moves ahead. But it was Captain Amy Torres who truly showed the Drelith what humanity could become. Her destroyer squadron had been assigned to punch through the enemy line and reach the prison ships hiding in the rear. It was a suicide mission. Everyone knew it. Amy had volunteered anyway. Her squadron of 12 ships faced over 100 Drelith vessels blocking their path. She should have died in the first minute of the engagement. Instead, she led her ships on a twisting, turning path through the enemy formation, using the Drelith's own ships as shields against their own fire. She anticipated their movements, predicted their tactics, and exploited every weakness in their formation. When her ship was hit and began to die, she transferred her flag to another vessel and kept fighting. When that ship was destroyed, she boarded a third. When the third was crippled, she led her surviving crew onto a captured Drelith destroyer and turned its weapons against its former owners. By the end of the day, Amy Torres had destroyed 47 enemy ships. Her squadron had reached the prison transports and freed 30,000 human captives, including her own mother and father. The Battle of the Red Nebula lasted for 3 days. When it was over, the Drelith home fleet was shattered. 17,000 of their ships had been destroyed. The survivors retreated in chaos, unable to believe what had happened. Humanity had lost 4,000 ships. 12 million people had died. It was the bloodiest day in human history. But they had won, and they were just getting started. In the months that followed, human forces pushed deeper and deeper into Drelith territory. They freed prisoners, liberated conquered worlds, and destroyed military installations. They moved with a speed and determination that the Drelith could not match. The empire that had terrorized the Outer Rim for 50,000 years began to crumble. World after world fell to the human advance. Drelith commanders surrendered rather than face the terrible warriors who kept coming, no matter what was thrown at them. And through it all, humanity never forgot who they were fighting for. They fought for the dead of New Eden. They fought for Commander Lisa Monroe and her crew. They fought for Derek Collins and his volunteers. They fought for every human who had ever been hurt by those who thought they were weak. The elders of the Galactic Council watched in amazement as the impossible happened. A species that should have been destroyed was instead destroying one of the oldest empires in the galaxy. Elder Thalos, watching from Nexus Prime, finally allowed himself a small smile. He had warned them. Nobody ever listened. But perhaps now, watching humanity tear through the Drelith Empire like fire through dry wood, other species would learn the lesson. Never provoke humanity. Never give them a reason to unleash what they kept buried inside. Never make them angry. Because when humans decided to fight, they did not stop until there was nothing left to fight. The Drelith-Human War lasted 3 years. When it began, every military expert in the galaxy predicted a quick Drelith victory. The Reptilian Empire had superior numbers, better technology, and thousands of years of military experience. Humanity was young, small, and had never fought a real war among the stars. 3 years later, the Drelith Empire existed only in history books. Fleet Commander Vorath stood in the command center of his last remaining stronghold, a fortress built into an asteroid in the outer reaches of Drelith space. Through the viewport, he could see human ships systematically destroying his final defenses. There was nowhere left to run. His fleet was gone. His armies were scattered. His empire was ash. "My lord," his aide Kesef said quietly, "the humans are requesting communication." Vorath closed his burning eyes. He had started this war so certain of victory. He had laughed at the warnings of the elders. He had dismissed humanity as prey animals playing at being civilized. How had it come to this? "Open the channel," he said. The screen flickered, and Admiral Nathan Cole's face appeared. The human looked older than he had at the start of the war. His hair was completely white now, and the lines on his face had deepened. But his eyes were still sharp, still focused, still burning with the same cold fire that had carried humanity through 3 years of impossible victories. "Commander Vorath," Cole said, "I am offering you the same terms we have offered every Draelith commander. Unconditional surrender, release of all remaining human prisoners, complete disarmament of all military vessels. In exchange, your civilian population will be protected, and you will face a trial for war crimes rather than immediate execution." Vorath let out a harsh laugh. "A trial? So you can parade me before your people and show them the monster you defeated?" "No," Cole replied calmly. "So we can show the galaxy that humanity believes in justice, even for our enemies. We are not going to execute you without a proper hearing. We are not going to torture you or your people. We are not going to do to your civilians what you did to ours." "Why not?" Vorath demanded. "We would have. If we had won, we would have enslaved your entire species. We would have worked your people to death in our mines and laughed while we did it." "I know," Cole said. "That is the difference between us." Vorath stared at the human on the screen. 3 years ago, he had thought humanity was weak because they showed mercy. 3 years ago, he had believed kindness was a sign of fear. Now he understood something that the elders had tried to tell him. Humanity was not merciful because they were weak. They were merciful because they were so strong that they could afford to be. They did not need to destroy the Draelith to feel safe. They did not need revenge to feel satisfied. They had already proven their power in the most decisive way possible, and now they could choose how to use that power. It was perhaps the most terrifying thing Vorath had ever realized. "I accept your terms," he said finally. "The Draeliths surrender." The war was over. In the months that followed, humanity showed the galaxy something unexpected. They had every right to be cruel. They had every reason to want revenge. The Draelith had killed millions of their people, enslaved hundreds of thousands more, and destroyed one of their most beautiful colony worlds. Instead of vengeance, humanity chose reconstruction. Human doctors set up medical centers on Draelith worlds, treating wounded civilians regardless of species. Human engineers helped repair infrastructure that had been damaged in the fighting. Human teachers opened schools where Draelith children could learn about the galaxy beyond their fallen empire. The surviving Draelith could not understand it. They had been taught all their lives that conquered species were to be used and discarded. The idea that a victor would help the defeated rebuild was completely alien to their culture. "Why are you doing this?" a young Draelith female named Thesara asked a human aid worker. Thesara's grandfather was Commander Vorath himself, now awaiting trial in a human prison. Her family had lost everything in the war. The aid worker, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Santos, smiled gently. "Because hate is exhausting. Because revenge does not bring back the dead. Because your people made a terrible mistake, but your children should not pay for it forever." "But we killed your people," Thesara said, confusion clear in her voice. "We enslaved them. We treated them like animals." "Yes, you did," Patricia agreed. "And we will never forget that. But we can choose what we do with that memory. We can use it to fuel endless anger, or we can use it to build something better." She put a hand on Thesara's shoulder. "Your grandfather was a monster, but you are not your grandfather. You get to choose what kind of person you want to be." 50 years after the war ended, the Galactic Council looked very different. Humanity now held a permanent seat among the elders, a status that normally required a species to have existed for at least 100,000 years. The exception had been made unanimously. After what humanity had demonstrated, no one was willing to deny them anything. Elder Thalos still attended the council meetings. though he moved even more slowly now. He had watched the entire war from beginning to end, and it had confirmed everything he had ever believed about humanity. They were terrifying. They were unpredictable. They could become monsters when provoked. But they could also become saints. The human delegate to the council was an elderly woman named Catherine Morris. She walked with a cane, and her hair was silver white, but her eyes still held the spark of her people. She had been a young soldier during the war, one of the many who had fought and survived. Thesara, now a Draelith diplomat, approached her after a council session. "Ambassador Morris," Thesara said formally, "my delegation wishes to express thanks for humanity's continued support of our reconstruction efforts." Catherine smiled warmly. "Your grandmother was the first Draelith to ask for asylum in human territory after the war. I remember her. She was a brave woman. She wanted her children to grow up without hate. She spoke often of human kindness," Thesara admitted. "It confused her, given what our people had done." "Kindness is easy when you are strong," Catherine replied. "Your people taught us something important, though you probably did not mean to. You taught us how strong we could become. Now we use that strength to help, rather than harm." She paused, and something harder entered her gaze. "Mostly." "Mostly?" Catherine looked toward the far end of the chamber, where a delegation of insect-like beings from the outer rim were casting nervous glances at the human section. "The Vex Collective has been raiding human mining stations for the past 2 years," Catherine said. "Small attacks, nothing major, but people have died. We have filed formal protests through the council." Her smile did not waver, but Thesara felt a chill run down her spine. It was the same chill her grandfather must have felt in his final days, when he realized he had made a terrible mistake. "I hope they choose to negotiate," Catherine continued pleasantly. "I really do hope they are wise enough to negotiate." "I hope so too, Ambassador." As Thesara walked away, she passed Elder Thalos, who was watching the exchange with ancient, knowing eyes. "The humans are remarkable," Thesara said to the elder. "They destroy an empire, then help rebuild it. They show mercy to those who showed them none. How do you explain such a species?" Thalos considered the question for a long moment. "Humanity lives short lives," he said finally. 100 years, perhaps a little more. Every human knows that their time is limited. So they pack more living into those years than species who live for millennia. More love, more anger, more spite. Is that why they are so dangerous? "It is why they are everything," Thalos replied. "They are dangerous when threatened. They are generous when victorious. They are creative when challenged. They are stubborn beyond reason. They will burn the galaxy to save one child, and then turn around and feed their enemies because it is the right thing to do." He looked at Catherine Morris, now laughing at something another delegate had said, looking for all the world like a kindly grandmother, rather than a representative of the most feared species in the galaxy. "The elders warned Commander Vorath," Thalos said softly. "We told him exactly what would happen if he attacked humanity. He did not listen. No one ever listens." "Do you think the Vex will listen?" Thalos shook his ancient head. "Probably not. The young always think they know better. They always believe they are different, that the rules do not apply to them, that they will succeed where others failed." He began to walk slowly toward the exit, his silver form catching the light of 1,000 stars visible through the transparent ceiling. "And humanity will be waiting for them, as they always are, patient, peaceful, hoping for the best, until someone makes them angry." Thalos paused at the door and looked back at Thesara. "Until someone makes them angry," he agreed. "And then the galaxy remembers why the elders warned them. Never provoke humanity." Far across the chamber, Ambassador Catherine Morris caught Thalos looking at her. She raised her hand in a friendly wave, smiling the worn smile of a species that had learned to forgive. But in her eyes, Thalos could see it. The fire, the strength, the promise. Humanity hoped for peace, but they were always ready for war. And now the whole galaxy knew it. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest building in the known universe. It stood on a planet called Nexus Prime, a world that belonged to no single species, but to all of them. The hall stretched for miles in every direction, with ceilings so high that clouds sometimes formed inside. More than 3,000 different alien races sent their representatives here to discuss matters of peace, trade, and survival. Among all these species, the oldest and most respected were the Cathari. They had silver skin that seemed to glow with inner light, and they moved slowly, as if time itself meant nothing to them. The Cathari had watched the galaxy for nearly 900,000 years. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had witnessed wars that burned across entire star systems. And they had learned, through all those long centuries, which species were dangerous and which were not. Elder Thalos was the oldest of the Cathari. Nobody knew exactly how many years he had lived, but some said he remembered when the first stars were young. He sat on his meditation throne, a chair made of crystal that had been carved before most species had learned to walk upright. His silver eyes were closed, but he saw everything. The doors of the great hall opened with a sound like thunder, and a new figure entered. He was tall, covered in scales the color of fresh blood, with eyes that burned like hot coals. His name was Vorath, and he was a commander of the Draelith Empire. The Draelith were a young species by galactic standards. They had only been traveling among the stars for 50,000 years, but in that time, they had built a powerful empire by conquering weaker species and taking their worlds. Vorath was their greatest military leader, and he walked into the council hall like he owned it. Elder Thalos opened his eyes slowly. He had been expecting this visit. The Cathari always knew when trouble was coming. "Commander Vorath," the elder said, his voice soft but somehow reaching every corner of the massive hall. "You have come to speak with the council." Vorath stopped in the center of the room. He did not bow. He did not show any sign of respect. The Draelith respected only power, and they believed they were the most powerful species in the galaxy. "I have come to inform the council of my plans," Vorath said. His voice was harsh, like metal scraping against stone. "The Draelith Empire will expand into Sector 7. I am not asking for permission. I am simply telling you what will happen." A wave of whispers passed through the assembly. Sector 7 was a distant region of space, far from the major trade routes and political centers. Most species paid little attention to it, but some of the older races knew what lived there. A being made entirely of light rose from its seat. This was Aethon, another of the Ancient Ones. Unlike the Cathari, Aethon had no physical body at all. He existed as pure energy, and he had witnessed the birth and death of countless civilizations. "Commander Vorath," Aethon said, his voice like music and warning mixed together, "we must advise you to reconsider. Sector 7 borders the territory of a species called humanity. They live on the third planet from a yellow star, in a system they call Sol." Vorath made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Humanity? I have heard of them. Soft creatures with weak bodies. They live for less than 100 years. They have no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons of any kind. They have been in space for barely 3 centuries. Why should the Draelith Empire fear such pathetic beings?" Elder Thalos leaned forward in his throne. For the first time in many thousands of years, something like fear appeared in his ancient eyes. "You do not understand," Thalos said slowly. "The Cathari have watched humanity since they first looked up at the night sky and wondered what the lights were. We watched them when they were still living in caves, hunting with pointed sticks. We watched them build their first cities, fight their first wars, create their first machines. And what did you see? Vorath asked with a mocking smile. Weak creatures struggling to survive on a harsh world. Yes, Thalos admitted. That is exactly what we saw. But we also saw something else, something that made us afraid. The hall fell completely silent. The Cathari were known throughout the galaxy for their wisdom and their calm. For one of them to admit fear was almost unheard of. Humanity should have died 100 times over, Thalos continued. Their planet tried to kill them with ice ages that lasted thousands of years. Diseases swept through their populations and killed millions. They fought wars among themselves that destroyed entire nations. And yet, every single time, they survived. Not because they were strong, not because they were smart, but because they simply refused to give up. Vorath crossed his arms over his scaled chest. Stubbornness is not the same as power. You are wrong, said another elder, a creature with 8 legs and eyes that could see in every direction at once. Stubbornness, when combined with human creativity and human anger, becomes something far more dangerous than simple power. We have seen what happens when humans are pushed too far. Tell me then, Vorath said, his voice dripping with contempt. What happens? Aethon floated closer to the Dralith commander. His light dimmed slightly, as if the memory he was about to share brought him pain. 300 years ago, a species called the Vorn attacked a human colony. The Vorn were powerful. They had better ships, better weapons, and more soldiers than humanity could ever hope to match. They expected an easy victory. And what happened? The Vorn no longer exist, Aethon said simply. Their homeworld is empty. Their colonies are abandoned. Their entire species was wiped from the galaxy in less than 50 years. The humans did not just defeat them, they erased them completely, as if they had never existed at all. Vorath was quiet for a moment. Then he shook his head. Stories to frighten children. The Dralith are not the Vorn. We are stronger, smarter, and more numerous. Humanity will learn to fear us, not the other way around. Elder Thalos sighed deeply. He had lived long enough to recognize the look in Vorath's eyes. It was the look of someone who had already made up his mind, who would not listen to reason no matter how clearly it was presented. Commander Vorath, Thalos said, I will tell you one more thing about humanity. They have a concept that does not exist in most other species. They call it spite. It means doing something harmful to an enemy, even if it hurts yourself, simply because you refuse to let that enemy win. Humans will burn their own cities before they let invaders take them. They will destroy their own ships to take enemy vessels with them. They will sacrifice everything, their lives, their futures, their children, for revenge. That sounds like madness, Vorath said. Perhaps it is, Thalos agreed, but it is a madness that has allowed humanity to survive when stronger species have fallen. I am warning you, Commander. I am begging you. Do not attack humanity. Do not give them a reason to turn that madness against you. Vorath turned away from the elder and began walking toward the door. The Dralith Empire fears nothing, he said over his shoulder. Certainly not a species of soft, short-lived creatures who have barely learned to travel between stars. In 1 month, I will lead my fleet into Sector 7. I will take their worlds, and I will show the galaxy that humanity is nothing special. The doors closed behind him with a boom that echoed through the hall. Elder Thalos closed his eyes again and spoke so quietly that only those closest to him could hear. Then the Dralith will learn, as all the others learned. They will learn too late, and they will pay the price that all fools pay when they ignore the warnings of those who came before. Aethon dimmed his light in agreement. Should we warn humanity? Tell them what is coming? Thalos shook his head slowly. Humanity does not need our warning. They have been preparing for this moment since they first reached the stars. They know that somewhere, sometime, someone would come to take what they have built. And they have been waiting. Waiting for what? The ancient Kethari opened his silver eyes and stared at the doors through which Vorath had departed. Waiting for a reason, he said. Humans do not start wars, but they finish them. Always.